Hello, I'm Dean.
And I'm Emily.
And welcome to Hackaweek Coast2Coast, episode 0. And
It's an inaugural episode.
Why do we call it Coast to Coast? Because I'm in North Carolina.
And I'm in Los Angeles.
There you go. We're covering the entire U.S. here in one podcast. So Emily and I both make all kinds of stuff all the time, and we met on Twitter and decided to do a podcast and share all of our crazy brainy stuff with you people. And so in this first episode, we're going to kind of disclose where we came from, what makes us do the things we do, why we're inspired to do them, and that's pretty much it. We'll tell you a little about how each episode is going to go. I'm going to let Emily start off with this. Emily, why don't you tell the folks all about your crazy brain, how it works?
Right. Okay, so sometimes I'm not sure quite how to describe what I do, but I guess I'd say I work in mixed media, which sounds very arty. I didn't go to art school or anything, but I take a lot of found items, stuff that I find in like the trash or e-waste or stuff I've taken apart, and I like to recombine that stuff into new things. I really like the idea of like reusing stuff and like giving old stuff new life. So I have like my entire garage is full of mostly junk that I've collected with the idea that like I'm going to repurpose it at some point. And I like to work in like a few areas. I work in electronics, woodworking, a bit of metalwork, like welding. I do a little bit of machining and just other oddball stuff like animal bones, like collecting roadkill and cleaning it. Okay. All right. I think that's all I have to describe myself right now. You want to go ahead and say what you do?
Yeah, I started playing around with things as soon as I knew what a screwdriver was. I was born in 59, so grew up in the 60s, fully analog kind of person here. And my dad brought home some car parts when I was about 6 years old and threw something on the floor and said, "Here, have fun taking this apart." And handed me a screwdriver, and I took it apart. And that's when I realized things come apart. Things with screws can come apart. And so ever since that point, I've always been about taking things apart. And then at some point later, you have to, of course, put them back together. So, I learned how to do that. But the big inspiration for me probably came at about age 13 when I saw something on a public TV show. It was called Zoom. Probably some people maybe over 40 might remember that. It was on PBS. It was from WGBH in Boston. And it was a show that had things every week that, there were kids on the show, anywhere from age like 10 to 14, something like that. And they did all these really cool things. And I remember I wanted to be on that show so bad, but they had these things called Zoom Doos. And one of them was a crystal radio. And, that's the classic crystal radio that you can build with the antenna and all that, use a diode. And there was a section in it that said to use a cat's whisker, which was slang actually for a fine wire. I took it literally that it was a cat's whisker, and I cut my cat's whisker off. And I used it in this little crystal, and I'm moving it around and nothing was happening. And it just was like, well, shite, I made this thing and it's not working. But it kind of inspired me to just kind of keep trying after that. It got me like really interested, like what's the mystery of all this electronic stuff? I want to learn about it. And I had the opportunity in one of my shop classes to take electricity and just learn some basic stuff. And believe it or not, my teacher's name was Mr. Short. I'm just like, you can't make this crap up,
Big name.
He was really cool though. He was a great mentor. He kind of saw in me that, I had this spark. There we go, another crazy pun. But I really wanted to learn about it. So there was lots of books that were still around, and he loaned me some stuff. And I remember I fully got into it. I learned all about for instance, there was a formula I found for the length of an antenna for a given frequency that you wanted to receive. And then I figured out what FM frequency this one radio station I could barely get that played some really good progressive rock when I was a teenager, and I could barely get it. I was living up in the mountains in the Adirondacks in New York where I grew up. And once I figured that formula out, I went out in the trees behind our house and put up like this 70-foot long piece of wire and a dipole antenna. And suddenly I could get these stations that were like 80 miles away. And, this world opened up to me. And then I started knocking door to door, asking people for old electronics they didn't want. And during the 70s, a lot of moms were home. They weren't really working. It was a little bit different time then. They were staying home, taking care of the kids in the house and all that. And I would go knocking on these doors, in the summertime when I was off from school. My mom would go shopping, and I'd just say, hey, my name's Dean. I'm interested in electronics. Want to learn about stuff? Do you have any old junk electronics or radios? And it was amazing how many, pieces of electronics these women would like, here, take this. Because, husband's not home. Let me get rid of this crap. And so I had a bedroom full of junk. And that's kind of how I learned, was just taking things apart, seeing if I could fix them, put them back together, and learn as you go, and never got electrocuted. And here I am, still alive to tell the tale. A very supportive mom in that regard too. So
that's really the best way to learn. I mean, I learned the same way by just taking stuff apart. I never went door to door because I think that was probably that was kind of a different thing by the time I was a kid. I'm a kid of the 90s, and people just weren't home at all during the day. But I did a lot of dumpster diving. And my parents, whenever anything was broken, I would just take it and start taking it apart. And I remember taking apart a VCR, and I had no idea what I was doing, but I just thought it was cool inside. And I took it all apart, and of course I broke it. I could not put it back together because I was probably 10 years old or something. But yeah, I just kept taking things apart, and it kind of helped being around parents who did stuff on their own, because my parents, they didn't want to ever spend money to pay someone to do something. So my dad worked on the car, and if things were broken around the home, if it was something electrical, my dad would be trying to fix it, and my mom would try to fix basically everything else. And just watching them take things apart and put them back together and repair them, you just learn a lot by just digging in there and getting your fingers in stuff, and just getting your fingers dirty and learning how things work, and these kind of clips hold these things on, and you just learn so much that way. And I think that's really great for kids to be able to have that opportunity, some unstructured deconstructing time is just an awesome thing for kids.
Definitely, the Makerspaces where you get to just like you said, take things apart. I remember at the first Maker Fair I went to in the Bay Area, there was a section where it was, I loved it myself. I just went back to being a kid. It was this area that was probably 40 feet by 40 feet, full of just all kinds of e-waste junk, and kids were in there just ripping stuff apart, banging on it with hammers. Some kids were taking it apart. There was tools available. And this one little kid came up to me and goes, I made this. And it was a printer that he shoved a couple circuit boards in and put some other things on. And it was just basically a sculpture. But he was so happy that he did this thing out of a pile of junk. He made this thing, he was very proud of it. And I remember I wanted to take his picture, and his dad was looking at me kind of funny. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm in a new world here where, they're probably thinking I'm a weirdo. I want to take a picture of your kid. It's no, I'm proud of your kid for what he did here. He's just he's learning a new thing. Maybe he's inspired. He's going to be an engineer one day, but that's a great way of doing it. It's just, getting your hands on. You can go to school, you can learn all that stuff, but where you really learn, I have found, is by getting your hands dirty. Just like you said, get in there and take stuff apart. And I had parents like that too. I grew up without a lot of income coming in. So my parents grew up during the Depression. They needed to figure out how to just take everything they had and recycle it, reuse it, fix it, because you just did not have, the resources to go out and buy something new like people do now. It's the TV doesn't work, throw it in the dumpster, go buy another one at Best Buy. And, as well as I, because you fortunately Emily has access to an e-waste pile, by the way, that I don't, and a lot of us covet her e-waste pile because she finds so much cool stuff there. And I used to do that too at certain places I've lived, and various places I've been, that there was these places where there's just piles of electronics, and I look at it as wow, free parts. You just go salvage all these little bits and pieces and put them in your little drawers in your workshop. And you don't have to order stuff from the electronics houses. You just have it there because you salvaged it. And salvaging stuff is a great way to learn too, because you learn how to take it apart, how to salvage it. And then you might dig up online, what's this little part? What's it do? And then you find videos like what I've posted about, where I explain what a transistor does or what a diode does. And other people do these things too with electronics tutorials. So it's a really great way to learn.
And you know what? Honestly, digging through e-waste and whatever else is it's not just a good way to learn, but it's like a super good source for project ideas, because I don't know how many projects I've had that have started with like, I found this thing in this dumpster and I took it apart, and hey, there's this oddball part in it. What does this part do? And then I look it up and I'm like, hey, this thing is really cool. What can I do with this? And then a whole project, it's like the seed for a whole project that grows from there. And sometimes, like, you know, you have ideas that just come straight out of your head, and other times they just kind of grow organically that way. And honestly, like, digging through old stuff is such a source of inspiration for me for like coming up with the ideas for the things that I do. Like, we can see behind me kind of right here. This is my like latest project I've just finished, and it's a mood lamp, but it has an old like PC board on it that I think I dug, I think I dug it out of a dumpster behind an elementary school when I was like 13. So that thing's been kicking around in my junk pile for 20 years.
I didn't know it was that old. I thought you just recently found that.
Yeah. No, I honestly, I think it came from a school, but I don't remember because it's one of like the veterans. It's been in my junk for so long that I don't know where it came from to be absolutely sure.
Yeah, that thing's really great. It's backlit with LEDs, and it's made of what I know as G10 material. It's kind of the clear mil-spec printed circuit board material, and light will shine through it. So she put some LEDs behind it. It's a really cool little project. That thing's great.
Hey, so you mentioned Zoom. Did you ever watch Mr. Wizard? Do you remember Mr. Wizard?
I remember it, but I don't think I ever watched it. I don't know. I had a limited amount of TV when I was growing up, and then later on kind of got away from that stuff. I kind of got out of the whole electronics and everything for about like 25 years or so. And when I got laid off from a job in 2008, I was unemployed for a while. I totally went back into it. I was like sitting at home bored, put in some job applications, finding nothing, and I was just going crazy. And I went, well, I'm going to start back into my electronics thing, because that was always something that was kind of comforting to me. At least I'm doing something. I feel like something's going on where I don't feel worthless basically. So that's when I got back into it again, was around 2008, and then Hackaweek started around 2011. But no, I do not remember Mr. Wizard. But what was that show about?
It was like I guess it was kind of a science show. This is like well before like Bill Nye the Science Guy was on TV, because it was like a very 1960s or maybe early 70s TV show. And when I was a kid, we would go stay at my grandparents' house when my parents were both working, and my grandparents had cable, and it was the only thing on, I think it was on Nickelodeon. It was the only like educational show on Nickelodeon back then. And it was just this old dude, and like he would have kids on and they would do science experiments. And like, I can't imagine that it would be popular today because it was like very dry. But I remember he showed how to make styrofoam. Like he had these little pellets and he did this thing and he put them in this metal mold.
EPS, expanded polystyrene.
Yeah. And he showed the kids, and they made like, they put them in the mold and heated it up, and then poof, like they open it and they had styrofoam fishes. And I just thought that was amazing. And like, he just made that like in that thing. And like, and it was being stuck over at my grandparents' house for like 12 hours every Saturday and Sunday. Like there was nothing to do, but like I would watch that show, and it was just full of just mind-blowing things that I didn't know were possible. And that was a good thing for me as a kid, to just like see someone else doing these things, and to see like kids doing that stuff too.
Well, yeah, it inspires you as a kid too. You're like, well, I can do that. If you see other people do it, that's the other thing too. That's kind of funny, is that the whole fear of failure thing, and all that, and how people are afraid to try a thing because they think, well, what if I can't do it? Well, if you can't do it, it's not a big deal. You're trying and you learn as you go. And, I think that's what holds people back with trying to do some of the stuff, like making things or learning how to solder or all kinds of things. I've seen so many people, when you try to encourage them to do it, and they're very reluctant, and it's all out of fear of not being able to do it. Well, of course you can't. You've never done it before. You never knew how to use a pencil when you were in kindergarten. It took you a while to learn how to write your name, but you eventually learned how, and so, you just got to be willing to try. And so that kind of leads into I guess our fail thing that we like to focus on a bit, both of us. Mistakes are okay. They're an okay thing because that's how you learn. You know, hopefully you learn from your mistakes. Otherwise, you keep repeating them. I think they call it insanity. But anyway, so both of us have got plenty of stories of times when we've worked on projects, things didn't go right. I've got them in my YouTube videos. I used to delete some of that stuff out. My wife, Lisa, one day said, you know, you should leave those in because it shows people that, you know, you're not superhuman. You're just a person that makes mistakes too. And so I do now. I leave them in my videos. And, you know, we both fail a lot at things. So one of the things we want to do in this podcast every episode is the fail of the week because they happen. So do you want to go first? Do you want me to go? I don't know what I've done this week that I got a fail this week. So let me hear yours first.
Okay. All right. I'll go first. Okay. So my fail of the week was actually with this mood lamp. And in building the wooden frame for this thing, I needed to route out like a recess for the board to fit into on the front, and I needed to route out a recess on the back for the back panel to fit on. And I was using a rabbiting router bit, and what that does for the people that aren't familiar with it, it cuts like a groove to a depth, and the bit itself has these bearings that they roll on, and you change the bearing to a different size, and depending on the size of the bearing, that changes the depth to which this thing cuts. So I was going around the back side of it, and it should just cut nice and smooth, like a nice straight line as you go around. But I had made an error in my construction of this thing, and there are these recesses that hold the potentiometers for changing the color of the knobs. And the recesses came up too close to the top. And so when I was cutting around, the bearing should have been rolling on a smooth surface, but then it dipped into each recess. So on the back side, instead of being a straight line, it goes straight, and then it has like a little bite out of it, and then straight, and then a little bite. So there's 3 little bites out of the backside that should have been straight. And if that had been on the front, like that would have been it. I would have had to start over again, but it's on the back, so it's okay. But when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, no, like what a frustrating thing, but it turned out okay.
I know that router sound. Yep. And you go, it's kind of like when you get a haircut and you hear that, and it's like, what was that? Oh, nothing, you know. Yeah, I've had a few of those with the router where you just kind of got that little divot someplace that you didn't think about, and you're watching the bit. You know, you're not so much watching where you're tracking, and the bearing suddenly jumps into this little recess, and well, that's that. That wood's gone. It's really hard to glue all that sawdust back together too.
Right. So what was your fail of the week?
Well, I was working with some LEDs this week on a car. I was putting some signal lights on a car that didn't have them. Talk more about that later. But I installed one of them in this little front signal light on an old 1953 MGTD that I was working with. It's a little surface mount LED from Super Bright LEDs, and it's got a little piece of kind of a ribbon cable PCB material. Then it goes to like a little pack where there's a resistor, and then it goes to 2 wires. Ran the whole thing in, installed it all. That was the first mistake I made is, you know, you never complete an installation of a thing without testing it, because the gods will bite you in the ass if you do that. If you put it all together, they'll go, oh, really? You think it's going to work now? You always test it halfway. Leave one screw out or something, right? So you test it, it works okay. Then you put that last screw in, and you're good. If you get cocky and put it all together, it's always going to screw up. That's kind of my take on it. So I put it all together. It didn't work. And I was like, well, what? You know, and I was kind of in a hurry, and I pull it all apart. Why is it not working? What could have possibly went wrong? All I did was just shove this thing in. Didn't even stop to think about, you know, the little resistor bridge could have broken loose or something like that. And so I'm testing it with my little 12-volt portable battery, you know, at the Sophie's making her bed in the background. So I'm testing it, you know, with the wires, and I'm checking everything. I even checked it with the voltmeter. Yeah, the battery's got power, yet it doesn't work. So what do? I go right up to the little, you know, surface mount, the little tiny LED with my 12 volts and see if I can make it work. No resistor, right? Yeah. It got really bright, really fast, and then it doesn't work anymore. So I totally killed it. I just fried this poor little resistor, you know, yanked it all back out, got back on the website, ordered some more. I ordered like 5 more just in case. And I'll use them, you know, I have them on hand. But it was kind of one of those moments like, that was just really stupid. I don't know, what were you thinking? You know, and I pulled it apart later. And sure enough, all I did was just, in putting it together and pulling on the wire, I had broken loose the little resistor connection. So
Yeah.
So there's a little silly fail, just not thinking about what I was doing, you know, and just like, well, let me test it right here and fry it instantly. So I'm sure that little resistor was knocking it down to, you know, around 3 volts. And I was putting 12 volts to it, but it was really bright for a second. It's very short second.
That reminds me, this was a big fail of mine. This was years ago, but I was living with a couple and I was living with them for free in exchange for working on their house. And at one point they decided they wanted their bathroom remodeled. So I was remodeling it and I put wall sconces all up along one side of the wall and I had to redo all the wiring. And I went up in the attic and I connected the wiring and I went downstairs and I flipped the light switch on and none of them came on. And so I'm like, okay, I hooked it up wrong. So I go back up there, I check it. It looks fine, but I'm like, I must have done something wrong. So I take it all apart. I put it back together downstairs, flip it back on and off, nothing. I spent like 3 days trying to figure out up in the attic what I had done wrong with this thing. Couldn't figure it out. And I was just pulling my hair out because I'm like, this all looks fine. Like everything here looks fine. All the wire, it's not that complicated, but everything looks okay and it's not working. And then one day, like I was just sitting there, I was doing something else and I was like, wait a second. And I went in and I checked the bulbs and I had accidentally burned out every single light bulb and every single sconce when I was connecting wire up there because I had connected it in a way that like I put 220, like 220, like 2 of the 120 lines together. So I ran 240 through all the sconces at the same time. And I blew every single bulb out. And that whole time I was thinking I had it wired wrong. And really I just blown up every single light bulb.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I've never done that one. That's good. I've had some crazy, you know, house wiring little fails here and there. I had a house I was working on once. I could not find the breaker for this one box under the house. Couldn't find it. I'm flipping all the breakers and I go back into the house and I tested it. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I don't know if it was in a sub panel. It was a duplex house too.
Yeah.
So there may have been a sub panel over in the other unit that I couldn't get at. And I was just so over it. I was just like, all I need to do is just get this box cut away from everything else, put a couple of wire nuts on it, cover it back up, and I can move on. And so I'm under this house. I'm like, this thing's live. I just need to cut this wire. And I took a pair of side cutters I had. I'm like, all right, sacrificial side cutters. Here we go. I actually cut a live wire on purpose. Made some nice big sparks. Yeah. And I'm sure it kicked somebody's breaker somewhere, but I don't know where. Yeah. And, you know, I got my job done and somebody probably came home and was like, why doesn't my TV work today? But, you know, shit happens. So another thing we want to do is Emily does a lot more stuff than I do every week. She's pretty busy with things, and you know, she's got a house full of projects going on all the time.
That's right.
So she usually has some project that she's done throughout the week that, you know, she hasn't posted on Twitter or shared somewhere. Although recently I will add that you just did your first for real live on YouTube on your channel video yesterday, right?
That's right.
Yeah. That was great.
Like how-to video is up on YouTube now.
With a couple of fails in the process, as I recall. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little thing on the Twitter feed about some of those moments, if you're a video blogger, you can relate, where you're trying to do just a simple line and you keep screwing it up over and over and over again. And you're like, what is this? It's just a simple sentence. Why can't I say it right? You know, and it happens over and over. But anyway, that's kind of fun. But we're going to call it Emily's Surprise Hack of the Week. And it's going to be a weekly thing that we hear from Emily. So Emily, take it away. What do you got this week?
Okay. So I don't think I have any surprise hacks of my own because everything I've done has like been a completed project, but I would like to take the opportunity to point out like a surprise hack that I saw someone else do. that I thought was pretty slick. So this guy I'm friends with on Twitter, his name is Rue Moore. If you're not following him, if anyone's listening and you're not following him, go check him out. It's RUE space MOHR. And he has, I would say it's a kind of a disorganized Twitter account, but he does some of the most interesting, like oddball one-off things. And he used a slider potentiometer, which like you find them in like stereo equipment. You'll use them with like little sliders to like maybe set like your levels on your equalizer. He took one of those and he turned it sideways so it was laying down flat, and he 3D printed a little bracket that stuck on there in place of the knob, and then he put a threaded rod into it, and then he put a cabinet, like hardware knob, like a drawer pull out on the end of it. And so he can control, like if you, rather than like, if you had a bit of electronics and you had a potentiometer you wanted to turn, instead you could control it by pulling a knob out or pushing it in, which I thought was a really cool like take on that, because I've never had any electronics where you like just pull a knob out further and push it in to like set a value. Sometimes you'll have something where you'll pull a switch out just for on and off, but this, like his potentiometer, you just pull it in and push it out. And I thought that was so cool. And it was really simple. And it looks great because he's using like cabinet hardware. So you have like a whole variety of like stuff if you go to the hardware store to look through all the like various drawer pulls and knobs. I thought that was so cool.
That's a pretty neat one. That kind of reminds me of an idea I've had for a while. I've been wanting to do like a tremolo, or just kind of a vibrato for a guitar, or any instrument, whatever. Is basically just you're just turning the volume up and down is all you're doing. And for a while I wanted to do something like that with like maybe a linear actuator, or even just kind of like a crank on a motor where it's moving a linear, a slider potentiometer like that. And you can vary the speed of the motor to just make it move up and down, where you get the wow, 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 wow kind of effect, out of it. Just a really gritty kind of an analog approach to it, rather than electronics, which is the way it's always done. I did that on one of my videos. I did a liquid tremolo kind of a thing. It's I think it was Dan Electro did one. You're gonna love this. It was.
I like it already.
It's a tremolo that was done fully mechanically, and it's just this little box, and it's got like a little. I gotta find something on my desk to demonstrate here. I don't have anything handy, but let's just use this little battery. Let's just pretend this little battery is full of Windex, basically, right? Which has got ammonia in it, which is a salt, and it's conductive electricity-wise. So it was wiggling back and forth like this with a little motor that was driving. And then in the top of it were two little electrodes. And then low level, not anything above like a half a volt, not even less than that, coming out of a pickup of a guitar, was going through this. So depending on where the liquid was, if it was making contact between the two little electrodes in there and how far the electrodes were immersed in the liquid, it acted like a variable potentiometer. But because it's liquid, it had this really cool kind of a cool curve to the way it worked, and a little bit random too. And then as you sped it up or down, all you did was just make it wiggle faster or slower. And it was called a liquid tremolo, and it was quite literally a liquid tremolo. And they for real had like Windex in it. That's what the liquid was. So I rigged something up on the bench on one of my hacks one day where I just took a little medicine jar and put just Windex in it. And I put one of my guitars on it, and it didn't work. And I realized it was because it was one of my guitars that has active pickups, which is like 1 volt or higher, I think, on the output. They're really loud. But I used one with just a regular passive pickup, and suddenly it worked. And it was just kind of wiggling back and forth with this little motor I had, just kind of, bumping it back and forth, which wasn't like the best way, but it was kind of a proof of concept thing. Mm-hmm. And I always wanted to build a full on one. But if you Google that, if you Google liquid tremolo, you'll find it. There's some pretty neat videos on the thing, full teardowns of how they were built and everything. But what a brilliant way to get the job done, that, some engineer somewhere went, well, this will work. I mean, what a creative mind that person was. I don't know who came up with it, but That was pretty neat. It was around in the 50s and 60s. It was a really popular tremolo because it had this really nice, smooth transition on the the volume up and the volume down part, and no electronics to it. Basically, it was all fully analog. I love that kind of stuff. That's pretty neat.
I love that too. I mean, there's something so cool about analog solutions to what now would be digital problems. No one would ever do that now. Like why bother? You have a microprocessor to do that. But putting liquid in a little vial, how cool is that? I mean, I've seen optical tremolos and I thought that was cool, but like a liquid tremolo, that's just like 10 times cooler. Like that is so freaking cool.
Yeah, the optical ones tend to be pretty harsh. They don't have a nice smooth transition. It's kind of an on or off thing. It's a little tricky to do it. The slider synth thing I built, it was just basically a photoelectric cell and an LED, and then the proximity of the LED to the photoelectric cell changes the resistance. That was kind of fun. You could probably do something with that too, with a motor that just moved that back and forth, just change the proximity between the two. That might be a fun one. I tried building something like that with a 555 timer, but it ended up being really noisy. The 555 clicking on and off bled through over into the audio circuit, so you'd hear this little tick, tick, tick going on.
Yeah.
After I built it, I found some other links to people that tried to do the same thing. They ran into the same problem. They couldn't seem to filter out that little click, click, click thing that was going on with it. But it was, still a fun attempt. And, there you go. It was one of those kind of at the end of the project, it didn't really work like I wanted. But along the way, I got to build this thing and, actually salvaged it later and did some other stuff with it. So many of my projects end up, they'll go in a box. I'll hang on to them for a while. Maybe I'll show them off. And then one day I need a project box. So I rip everything out of the box, chuck it all aside, and use the box for something else, or pull apart the electronics or some piece of it and use it for something else later too. So sometimes the fails turn into just material for other stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That idea you had with the photoresistor, that kind of gives me an idea. It might be fun to try like using that thing that Rue did and kind of combine it with what you did. I think it'd be kind of cool to use a motor. So his thing essentially, you have a knob that you're pulling and pushing, right? So imagine that instead of having a knob pulling and pushing, imagine that it's riding like a little cog wheel that's on a motor, sort of like, a Hammond organ has those little tone wheels, right? And you could, if you had a spring to push the potentiometer down, and then you had the wheel on the motor pushing it up, then it would just kind of ride on that wheel, and it would change. It would be sliding the potentiometer up and down, and you could give it different tremolos based on the wheel, like the shape of the wheel, the profile of the wheel that you stick on the motor. I think that'd be kind of fun to try.
Yeah, I might have to do that one sometime. And you'd have the motor noise going on, but I don't think that would go into the audio at all. Just a totally separate circuit. So
yeah.
And you might hear it, but you're not going to hear it when, you got to, if it's on a guitar and you got the amplifier turned up and you're rocking. So I'm going to move on now to another thing we do, life hacks. You and I do this every day, stuff where you're just in the middle of working on a thing. Maybe you're with friends, you're just out in the wilds, you're doing whatever, something breaks down, you got to fix it. And I'm sure we both have a lot of these too. And other maker, hacker type people do the same thing. And incidentally today, on another side note, I saw a magazine in a store that was called, I think it was just called Life Hacks. I thought, that's pretty cool. I'd like to think that Hackaweek has had a part in turning the word hack into something that's friendly rather than, the whole oh, hackers, they're bad. They're after your credit cards.
Yeah.
And when I started Hackaweek, that's part of what the whole thing was the whole term hack isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's also a good thing. It's people doing some pretty neat stuff. So anyway, that aside, the life hacks, for lack of a better term, basically it's just problem solving, stuff you do to take care of a weird situation. So we're going to do something like this every week too. And they can be past, present, whatever. I've got one from the past that I really love to tell this story. Used to live in Hawaii, had this big 4-wheel drive van, and was around the backside of the island doing a road trip one day with a friend of mine. And the roads are really skinny, and they got these really skinny bridges. And then there's the tourist buses that haul around about 20 people, and these guys have done this trip like 1,000 times, and they're just bored. There's just another trip with a bunch of tourists. They just want to get home at the end of the day. And so they're going across these bridges. And if you happen to meet them on one of these bridges, they don't necessarily give you a lot of room to get past them. So we both met on one of these bridges, and one of my tires on this big 4-wheel drive van is like 12.5 inches wide, 33-inch tall tire, 1250 33 tire. It bumped the bridge abutment. And as soon as it did, the whole van kind of bang, shook like this. And then we got across the bridge, and then I hear, psst, and I'm like,
oh no.
And I had no spare, but I did have with me just, toolbox and stuff. I was doing handyman work, so I always had that in the van. Had a lot of just raw materials in there, and I had a little 12-volt air compressor on board. So we pull over, and my friend's like, so what are we going to do? We don't have a spare. I said, I'll figure something out. And so I'm pushing on this little slit in the tire, and it's like, the air is like, psh, and I push on it, and it's like, psh, and it would stop, just that easy. And it didn't take much pressure. And so I'm like, well, okay, I took some duct tape, stuck a piece of duct tape on it, slowed it down about 80%, but it was still leaking. And then I'm thinking, well, the tire's pretty well shot. I got to get another tire. I don't think that one can be fixed. So what I got to do is rig up something that's going to keep this thing pushed in place. So I go rifling through my stuff. I find a piece of plumber's tape. You probably know what plumber's tape is, right? Little strip of, people who don't know what it is, it's a strip of about 1 inch wide metal with a bunch of holes punched in it. And it's been meant for hanging pipes and just supporting pipes and stuff. You just cut off what you need. It's already got the holes. You shove screws in it. You hang the pipes, and there you go. So I cut a piece of about this long, and I put it up against the thing. And then I took 2 drywall screws, 2 1-inch drywall screws, and some washers, ran it right into the friggin' tire, and the air stopped. And I got up my tire gauge, and it's down to like 5 pounds. I'm like, well, okay. So I put the compressor on. I let the compressor run for like 30 minutes to air this tire back up until the compressor literally started to melt because the bearings were getting so hot in the plastic housing, and it quit. And I checked it, and it was at like 28 PSI. I was like, that's good enough. Let's go home. Got home, and the tire still was holding 12 pounds.
That's great.
I took pictures of it. I'm like, that is the coolest tire repair ever. Actually, literally screws and metal to patch the hole with a piece of duct tape underneath. So it worked. And that's all that mattered.
That is something to be proud of, like, forever. Like, I would be so proud of myself if I had done that. That is so good. That's like straight up Mad Max right there.
It was. That's what I was probably thinking of that at the time too. I'm like, this is crazy. This is Mad Max shit. But yeah, I'm the guy. I figure like in the zombie apocalypse, people are going to help me stay alive because I'm going to save their ass. And we're good.
That's what my coworkers always tell me. They're always saying, when the apocalypse comes, we're coming to your house because you're the only one who knows how to do anything.
It's just truth, I once had a friend tell me, I fixed something in front of his car, and he said, Dean, if we were ever in the wild somewhere and I cracked my head and my brain was swelling and somebody needed to drill a hole in my skull so I would stay alive, I'd want you to be the guy holding the Makita. I thought that was the best. I'm like, thank you very much. That's a nice compliment.
All right. So I guess my life hack is it's shop related. So my drill press is like a hand-me-down I inherited from, it was a friend of my dad's. It belonged to her late husband, and then it ended up like in my possession. And like the thing is just in sorry shape. It could be a really cool drill press. It's a 1944 Craftsman. I think they're referred to as the Mohawk ones because there was sort of like the cover that went on the belts on the top had like this protrusion that looks like a mohawk. But in any case, I got it, and like it's missing a bunch of parts. Like it doesn't it doesn't have the top cover, like it has the wrong table on it. There's all these things that are just like off about it. And the quill return spring never worked quite right. Like I'd pull it down and it would come part way up and then it would fall back down. And I was using it one day and the spring just completely gave out. And I took the whole thing out, and like, I guess the spring had broken at some point in the past, and someone had tried to like bend the remainder of the spring, because it's like a big like coily thing. It's not like a typical spring that's like stretchy. It's more like a coil. And they had tried to like retrofit this piece of this thing to work in there, and it just like didn't work right. And so like I couldn't make it work because it was breaking, and so I took it out, and I could not find a replacement because I guess no one makes a replacement quill spring for a 1944 Craftsman. And that was super annoying because like my drill press, like if I turned it on, the quill would just fall straight down onto the material. So I would have to like hold it up, and when I was done drilling, I'd have to push it back up. And I could not for the life of me find a spring for this thing. But then I had an idea. I was at the little like, it was a True Value hardware store near my house, and I was just like poking around because I kind of like the little hardware stores because sometimes they have like interesting stuff sitting around. They have like little bins and things that you don't find at Home Depot. And they had a whole section of springs. And I was just looking through them, and then I was like, wait a second. And so I bought a spring, and what I did was like where the top cover is supposed to mount on the drill press, there's these little holes that go around the rim for the screws to go through the top cover and like screw into the body or the head or whatever you'd call the top part of the drill press. But since that wasn't there, these little holes are just open. And so I took the spring and I hooked one end of it through one of those holes. And then I took an L bracket that I think I saved from a piece of IKEA furniture. Because, you know, like IKEA furniture, they always give you these L brackets that you're supposed to screw into the wall because like they don't want kids to climb on the furniture and then the furniture falls on the kids and kills them. And so they give you these L brackets, and I never use them. I don't have any kids. And so I have like 20 of these L brackets from all my IKEA furniture I've bought over the years. And so I took a hose clamp and I hose clamped that around the quill. And then I hooked the other end of the spring through that L bracket. So now I have a spring that's hooked to an L bracket that's hose clamped to the quill, and the other end is up in the body of the drill press. So when I pull the drill press, like the quill down, it stretches the spring like in a linear fashion. And when I let go, the spring just pulls the whole thing back up. And that's my quill spring on my drill press now.
Nice. And that drill press, you said what? It's made in the 40s?
Yeah, 1944.
That's freaking better than any drill press you can buy now in that same class, guaranteed. It's made out of better metal, better windings in the motor, better everything.
Yep.
Yeah, the old stuff is awesome.
It's got a General Electric motor on it, and it just looks so old school.
Yeah.
The motor might even be older than the rest of the drill press because the motor has kind of a 1930s look to it. So it might have been something that they stuck on there in like 1948 or something. They needed a motor. I don't know what year the motor's from, but it looks older than the drill press, but it runs great still.
Well, it's like, the wear item is, eventually the windings kind of will burn out, whatever, and then the motor starts to fail. So they change out the motors because the mechanical parts last forever, God, it's too bad Emily has a chance to get this awesome Delta drill press that she mentioned the other day on Twitter, but it runs on 223 phase, which she does not have at her house. Wah, wah, wah. That's sad.
I'm taking
it to run on the 110. There's a little hack I told you, but that's a little sketchy because you're pushing the windings to their limits basically on the heat thing.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I'm going to take it anyway. I have two options here. Well, one, I have to get rid of junk in my garage because I have too much stuff out there, and so some things are going to have to go, which like is just tragic. But it's probably good for me to get rid of some of my junk. But I have two options. One, I can get a variable frequency drive, and my coworker, he's actually buying the other drill press. And then he talked to his dad, and his dad's friend said, here, get this one. And he sent him a link to one that you can buy. And it takes 110 single phase and turns it into 223 phase, and it's $150.
Yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah. And so I'm like, oh man, I could just do that. So that's one option. And the other option, which I'm not sure if it's going to work yet or not, but I remembered up in my grandparents moved to Oregon when I was like 1 year old. And they had like a nice property up there with a barn and everything. And when I was up there in September, I was looking through my grandfather's garage, and both my grandparents have passed away, but I was looking through his garage because he used to be a machinist and he has all this cool stuff. And there was this box called Phase-O-Matic. And I don't know if this thing was like homemade or if it was like made by a really small time shop, but it looks homemade. It's a metal box, and it has, you know, those old school labelers that have the red label tape that like it punches.
Yeah.
So it says Phase-O-Matic in that printed on it, and it says 1 phase to 3 phase, 3 horsepower. And so it's some sort of a box that converts single phase to 3 phase.
I'll bet he built that.
He probably did.
I just about bet. I mean, with the name Phase-O-Matic.
Yeah. Yeah. So my parents are up there right now, and I text them and said, hey, can you bring that thing back for me? So they're going to bring it back. I don't know how many volts it takes. I don't know if it's 220 or 120. If it has the right specs, I'm going to try to use that. But I cannot let that drill press like pass me by. It's like a 1956 Delta floor drill press.
The mechanicals of that are awesome. And then the other option too is you could put a 110 motor on it.
Yes.
You know, that salvage yard that you go to, you never know. You might find a 110 motor there that will go on, you know, a capacitor start style motor, and just
as it turns out, I actually have a 3/4 horsepower single phase 110 volt motor sitting in my junk in the garage. So yeah,
Granger, get on Granger, find a pulley, done.
Yep. Oh, even easier than that, because this drill press, it actually has sort of like a mechanical linkage. So the motor sits well below, like a lot of drill presses, the motor sits all the way up in like the head, but these ones, the motor sits further down, and there's like a shaft that runs from the motor up. So I really just need to like fit the shaft of the motor into this, like it almost looks like the shaft you'd see under a truck that has universal joints.
Yeah, it's just a coupler.
Like
Coupler. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just need like a coupler to attach that.
Yeah. That's a Granger item too. They have those. Yeah.
So I think I have 3 options here, and like I just cannot let that drill press get away from me, or I'm going to be kicking myself the rest of my life.
Yeah, good for you. I'm glad you're getting it.
Yeah.
No, it's a cool find.
Yeah.
Well, we're now at a point where we can discuss current projects after all that stuff, because every week we've got something going on. And for me lately, it's been a lot of stuff at my business, Resto Euro. I have a business where I work on cars, service, and some restoration stuff. I don't do whole car restorations. It's mostly components. And, you know, there's projects there. There's also projects that I've got in my head that I'm in the midst of working on in the shop. But what have you got going on this week in your little world there?
So what have I got? I have 2 things going on. So one, and this is a thing I've been posting on Twitter about, my friend Roger and I met each other through our local like hacker meetup. We don't have a maker space near us, but we do have a weekly and a monthly hacker meetup where like just a group of people get together and they hang out in a shop and we work on stuff. And Roger, so like to rewind a little ways, like back in, it'd be like September, Roger had a friend that said, hey, I have a big screen TV. If you want it, like, come get it. And then Roger was like, hey, Emily, you know how to take things apart. I want to take that TV apart because I've never taken a TV apart before. Like, do you want to help me? And I was like, hell yeah, like that sounds like a lot of fun. So we spent like Saturday taking this thing apart. And before we left, the father who lived at this home said, hey, you like to take things apart. I have something that I want to give you. And he gave me this box of, it was like a 1980 Canon video camera. So this is like a camcorder, but this is old enough that like, it was not a camcorder that like, not even like a camcorder that has a memory stick, and not even a camcorder that has a video cassette in it, which is like what they had when I was a kid, even older than that. This camcorder was so old that you had a VCR you had to carry around with you. So you had this like battery powered VCR you'd carry in your hand, and then had a big cable that you'd like loop over your shoulder that went to the video camera itself.
Damn, what a dinosaur.
Right. Right. But this was like super high tech for the time.
Yeah.
And it also came with this other thing that I guess like maybe like Canon realized like, hey, people aren't buying this thing. And so like, let's make it more useful by allowing them to use this VCR, this video recorder thing as like a VCR to record their television programs. So it came with this box that was like a timer tuner. So you would set like with little knobs, you'd set like 7 p.m. channel 4 Thursday by turning all these little dials and flipping all these switches. And then it would turn the VCR on to that specific channel at that time for the amount of time you set it to record your show. In any case, I couldn't get any of this stuff working right, but Roger wanted to know if we could take the vacuum fluorescent display out of this timer tuner thing. And I was like, yeah, probably. And he's like, do you think we could power it up? And I was like, yeah, maybe. Like, we can try. And so last week, was it last week? It might have been 2 weeks ago already. We took it out, and then we like put together this rig on the bench top there that we like put together out of like some batteries and a power supply out of an HP printer that I got from the e-waste at work, and like just some other junk. And we got this vacuum fluorescent display to light up. And for people that aren't familiar with vacuum fluorescent displays, they're those like very 1980s like green displays you'd see in VCRs and microwaves, like blinking 12 o'clock because you like could never figure out how to set your VCR time right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Roger got pretty excited. We got it to get powered up. And then he said, well, do you think we could like actually make it do what it's supposed to instead of just like kind of probing around on it and making segments light up? Do you think we could give it like the right signals and make it display things? And I was like, well, we can try. Like, Roger knows how to program. I'm like pretty bad at programming. So I was like, if you do the coding, like I'll help us figure out the hardware. So we are now at a point where after 2 or 3 meetings, we actually have like a board, and we have like all the logic put together for it. And Roger wrote the code. And I think on Monday, we're going to be able to like mate the vacuum fluorescent display with the board. And then we should be able to make it display anything we want on there by giving it commands from an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi. So we could make it scroll like letters across there, or we could just have it display a time, or any damn thing we want. So that is the project that I have been working on. And then there's another project that this one is actually made possible by you, Dean, because you gave me one of these. Is it pronounced EMIC or EMIC? I don't know how to pronounce that thing.
EMIC. Yeah, EMIC 2. Yeah.
So I picked up a thing again out of the e-waste. It was an old 80s like touch tone telephone that I got from the e-waste at work. And it's a handset that you set down. And so what I'm doing with that is I'm using the EMIC, and the EMIC is like a text to voice speech synthesizing board. And so I'm writing a choose your own adventure game for the Arduino. And essentially what this thing is going to be is like when you pick up the phone, it's going to talk to you, and it's going to be like an automated phone system, but you're going to go through the system and it's going to give you choices that it's going to turn it into an adventure. So at first it's going to start off like you're just picking up a phone and you're hearing an automated phone system, but then you're going to get to make decisions like, and it'll read them to you over the phone. So it'll say like, if you want to walk through the door, press 1, and you press 1 on the keypad, and then it'll say like, you have entered a dark room. There's a candle burning in the corner. Like, wow. do you want to go pick up the candle? So like that's the next project, and I'm starting to get that thing put back together now that I have some of my other projects out of the way.
That is going to be a rabbit hole of code.
Yes. Yes.
Because of all the different decisions, different things you can do. That's cool. That's going to be fun. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I Parallax, and I was in on some of the beta testing on those, and I had a couple of them. And I saw that Emily was messing around with doing some text-to-speech stuff, and I just said, hey, I got an extra one of these. You want it? So, mailed it to her. It's just a little thing about a little bigger than a postage stamp with a couple of bodges on it because it was a prototype, which is kind of neat. So it's kind of cool to have.
Yeah, it's a great product, and thank you. Like that's going to make things so much better because I was thinking there's a text-to-speech library for Arduino that already like exists, but there's only like 300 words in it.
Right.
And 300 sounds like a lot until you're trying to write like basically anything.
Not very much, is it?
Yeah, and you realize like, oh, I don't even have basic words like door, you know, like you can't say open the door because like that's not one of the 300 words they chose to include in this library. But the Emic like will make any word as long as you give it the text, which is super cool.
And it's fun too if you play with stuff a little bit with the spelling and such. It'll actually say words a little different because you probably noticed a couple of things like it says a little strange, and then the inflection if you use punctuation, exclamation points, and question marks and things like that, it'll pick up on that, but it'll do funny things with it. So once you kind of learn that, you can fudge it a little bit and get it to do goofy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Plus, you can change the pitch of it. You can make it sing songs. You can do all kinds of stuff. And it's got, I think, what is it, like 7 different voices it makes? 5 or 7, something like that.
Yeah, which is great because I wasn't expecting that. And now I can have like different characters in my game that I'm putting together, which will be so fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what have I done this week? Well, I've been working hard at the shop. But I guess, you know, the big push for me as far as a project, and it's actually a project on a customer's car, going back to that story I was telling you about the LEDs in the lights. It was it's a 1953 MGTD, and halfway through the year they decided to put signal lights in. I did a little quickie video about it today on my YouTube channel on my phone. And this one does not have signal lights, and the guy wants signal lights. But on an older car like that, my philosophy is to try not to chop anything. Don't really alter the existing wire harness. Try to preserve everything like you can, like a doctor, you know, first do no harm.
Yeah.
That's generally the way I approach all the older vintage cars I work on. So I told him, I said, yeah, I can probably do something for you with some little LEDs where I just put those into the light fixtures on the front, the rear. And then we can just put a little switch somewhere in the dash where it's just turn left and right, you know, and you'll have to turn it off yourself. It won't be auto canceling. And so I found on super bright LEDs, these really nifty little LEDs, and I'm thinking they said they were 7,000 lumens, which is like crazy bright. I don't know if that's actually the number or not, but they are really bright.
Yeah, that's super bright.
If you hold one here in front of you, you look at it, you can't look at it. It's that bright. You don't like, you know, your inclination is to turn away. And they have a little sticky back on them, which is really handy. And so I put one of those in each one of the 4 corners of the car in the light fixtures, and then just ran the wires up to the dash, put a little toggle switch in, just a little single pole double throw switch. And then it goes to a flasher unit for LEDs because you can't use a standard flasher that works with incandescent bulbs, because those work with a little bimetallic strip that heats up. When you power it up, it sends current to the bulb, and then the bulb and everything, and the whole thing is basically a dead short. And it's heating up this little bimetallic strip, and as it expands, it goes like that, it disconnects, and then it cools off and it clicks back together. So in old school cars, that little click, click you're hearing was actually a physical click of 2 little metal strips coming together and apart as the thing heated up, cooled off, heated up, cooled off. On later cars, it's just a little piezoelectric element making a clicky noise to remind you have your signal light on. But for the LEDs, you need like a little 555 circuit in this special little flasher that you can also get from super bright LEDs. So I got that all done today, and I got it in the car, and it works great. And it's just there in the existing light fixtures. The only thing added to the car is the switch and some wiring. Didn't actually do anything to the existing wiring of the car. You can't even tell anything ever really happened to it. There's just a little switch on the dash, and now the guy has signal lights. So everybody's happy. Now we just need to not crash into people, because the signal lights aren't going to solve everything. But, you know, so that was about the extent of it this week. And I'm in the midst of packing up some of the shop, getting ready to move into a new house this year. It's a big deal. My wife and I are looking to buy something a little more out in the country. So in the very near future, hopefully we'll have a much bigger hack shack to play around in. Right now I've got a nice little workshop out back. Lisa has half, I have half. She does a lot of jewelry and stuff. And so that's the plan, is get out of here into a new place. But in the meantime, I'll be doing just some little minimal stuff out there in the shop. I got a lot of ideas going on, and maybe I can do a little bit at a time on some of them, not so much complete projects, but a little here, a little there, and some stuff to talk about every week. Plus I got the business and all the stuff that goes on there. And there's always projects there happening, like that thing with the LEDs that I do for people too, little problem solving things that aren't necessarily something off the shelf. So I think that's probably going to wrap up our first episode.
Yeah, I think so.
I think that went pretty well.
I agree.
So you can find us both. I'm on Twitter at Hackaweek. Just look for Dean Segovis, and Emily. I'm
at MLE, so the letters MLE_online.
And also you'll find this on YouTube. You're probably watching it now on YouTube, or you can also find the podcast on SoundCloud. And in the future, we'll be getting it on some other places where podcasts are hosted. But for right now, it's going to be just SoundCloud, my website, which is hackaweek.com, all kinds of fun stuff there, like 9 years worth of projects. And you go on there and there's a little search bar, search for pretty much whatever interests you. You'll probably find something on the subject, because I've done over the past 9 years a little bit of everything from food to woodworking, metalworking, electronics, all kinds of things. So go check that out. And in the future, we'll have a little donate link. And if you want to help out supporting the podcast, you can do so there. We'll get there one day. But this is episode 0. We're working at like computers. 0 is a number, so we're starting with 0.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Dean. This was great.
All right, folks. And as we always say, till next time, you know the line, Emily. Keep on hacking.
Keep on hacking.
All right. Bye.
Bye.